I should have known the night was going to change everything the moment I saw him leaning against his truck, hat tilted low, sunlight cutting through the dust behind him like some cliché from a country song. But clichés only feel that way until you're living one, right? I'd stayed late after rodeo practice again, working my rope until my hands ached. It wasn't just about getting better anymore, it was about keeping my head busy. Small-town evenings had a way of getting too quiet when you didn't want to think. And lately I'd been thinking too much about him. About Luke. Luke had been part of my life for as long as I could remember. We grew up on neighboring ranches, went to the same school, even ended up riding in the same rodeo circuit now that we were grown. He was all easy grins and steady hands, the kind of man who could calm a spooked horse, or a nervous heart, without even trying. Meh. I was a little rougher around the edges, always feeling like I had something to prove. He waved as I coiled my rope, that stupidly charming smile spreading across his sunburned face. Need a ride, city boy? He teased, even though I hadn't lived anywhere near a city in years. Truck's in the shop, I said, trying to sound casual as I wiped sweat from my brow. Unless you plan on leaving me to hitchhike with the tumbleweeds. He chuckled, a low warm sound that curled right into my chest. Wouldn't dream of it. I tossed my gear in the bed of his pickup and climbed into the passenger seat. The air smelled faintly of leather, dust, and whatever cologne he wore that made me want to lean just a little too close. Country music hummed through the speakers, and the windows were down, letting the golden light pour in. We didn't talk much at first, but the silence between us had never felt awkward, just heavy in that way you can't quite name. The town rolled by in streaks of amber and rust as the sun dipped lower, and I caught myself watching the way his hands rested on the wheel, strong, tanned, steady. My stomach twisted, the same way it always did when I realized how long I'd been looking. It wasn't like I hadn't noticed him before. It's just that lately noticing felt different, sharper, dangerous. And maybe, deep down, I already knew this night was going to cross a line we'd been dancing around for years. It's strange how some friendships just stick. Like burrs caught in denim, you don't even notice how deep they've rooted until you try to pull them off. That was me and Luke. We weren't just friends. We were fixtures in each other's lives, like the rusted fences and the sound of crickets after sundown. We'd met when I was 12, skinny and awkward, freshly moved to this dusty corner of Texas with my dad. Luke was already the golden boy, broad-shouldered, tanned, and confident in that effortless way I'd spent years trying to imitate. He found me behind the stables, struggling to saddle a horse twice my size. Instead of laughing, he'd crouched down, grinning under his Stetson. "Careful there," he'd said. "She's a sweetheart, but she'll make a fool out of you if you rush her." That was the first time I heard his laugh, warm and unguarded. It stuck with me. Maybe it never left. From then on, we'd been inseparable. Trail rides, rodeo training, late-night bonfires where the stars felt close enough to touch. Luke was the calm to my storm, the one who'd patch up my scrapes when I got too reckless, or tell me to breathe when life kicked up too much dust. And I told myself that was all it was, friendship. Solid, simple, safe. But lately, I wasn't so sure. The truck rumbled down the dirt road, radio low, our conversation meandering like the landscape outside. "So," Luke started, flicking me a sidelong glance. "Coach says you're pushing yourself too hard." "That true?" I snorted. "He says that every week." "Yeah, but this time he's right. You've been riding like you're running from something." His tone was easy, but the way he looked at me, steady, searching, made my chest tighten. I shrugged. "Maybe I am." "Then I hope whatever it is doesn't catch you," he said softly. That earned him a small smile. He had this way of saying things that sounded simple but hit deep, like he knew more than I ever said out loud. We reached the main road and the rain started, soft at first, then heavier, pattering against the windshield. Luke cursed under his breath. "Guess that's what I get for leaving the tarp in the barn." "You still planning to camp out at the rodeo grounds tomorrow?" "Yeah," I said. "Gonna get there early to practice before the others show up." He frowned. "With that tent that leaks? You're gonna drown before you rope anything." "I'll manage," I said, but my grin gave me away. "Sure you will," he said, shaking his head. "Tell you what, if it rains again tomorrow you're bunking in my truck. Ain't no sense in proving you can outstubborn the weather." I opened my mouth to argue, but something about the way he said it, half teasing, half serious, made me pause. My pulse quickened and I turned to the window to hide it. The rain streaked down the glass, blurring the world into shades of gray and gold. By the time we reached my place, the storm had turned the gravel drive into mud. Luke insisted on walking me to the porch despite my protests. "You'll ruin your boots," I said. He laughed, hopping over a puddle. "They've seen worse." We stopped under the eaves, rain misting around us. The porch light cast him in soft amber, drops clinging to his hair, his shirt damp where it stuck to his chest. He looked at me, then really looked, and for a heartbeat the world went still. "You all right?" he asked. I nodded, but my throat was tight. "Yeah. Just tired." He smiled gently. "You've been tired a lot lately." It was such a small thing to say, but it landed like a truth I hadn't wanted to admit. I opened my mouth, searching for words, but he just tipped his hat at me and stepped back into the rain. "Get some sleep, cowboy," he called over his shoulder. "Tomorrow's gonna be a long day." The next morning came gray and heavy with clouds. The rodeo grounds were slick with mud, and most of the others had packed it in early. Luke and I stuck it out, running drills until our horses were restless and the sky threatened another downpour. When it hit, it came fast, sheets of rain driving us under the bleachers, soaked and breathless from laughing. "Should have listened to me," Luke said, shaking his hair like a dog. "Don't start," I shot back, peeling off my wet gloves. "You're just mad I lasted longer than you." He grinned, teeth flashing. "Please. I let you win." "Sure you did." The space under the bleachers was narrow, the air thick with the smell of rain and hay. We sat side by side, knees bumping, both pretending not to notice. I could feel the heat radiating off him despite the chill, his arm brushing mine whenever he shifted. "Guess you're sleeping in the truck tonight," he said, voice low, almost teasing. "Told you that tent wouldn't make it." "Don't sound so smug." "Who's smug?" "I'm being neighborly." I laughed, shaking my head, but when I looked over, his eyes were on me, softer than before. The kind of look that lingers, that makes your pulse stumble. For a second neither of us spoke. The rain hammered the metal above us, and all I could hear was the uneven rhythm of my own breathing. I looked away first, pretending to check the sky. "Looks like it's settling in," I said. "Might not stop till morning." "Then you're stuck with me," he said. It was meant as a joke, but something in his tone made it sound like a promise. That night we sat in his truck, wrapped in spare blankets, steam fogging the windows. He passed me a thermos of coffee, his fingers brushing mine, just a fleeting touch, but it left a spark I couldn't ignore. "Remind me why we do this again?" I asked, watching rain bead down the glass. "Because you love it," he said easily. "And you'd go crazy without it." He wasn't wrong. Rodeo had been my escape for as long as I could remember. But lately I'd started wondering if what I really loved was these stolen moments with him, the way his voice filled the quiet, the safety of being near him. He glanced over, eyebrow raised. "You're thinking too hard again." "Can't help it." He grinned. "That's your problem, Sam. You think too much." "Yeah. And what's yours?" He didn't answer right away. Instead he leaned back, gaze flicking to mine, unreadable and intense. "You," he said softly. "You're my problem." It was a joke, at least it was supposed to be. But something in the air shifted after that, a tension neither of us wanted to name. Outside, the rain fell harder, drowning the world beyond the truck. Inside, the space between us felt too small, too charged. I wanted to laugh it off, to change the subject, but the words tangled somewhere in my chest. So I just sipped the coffee and watched the storm through the fogged window, pretending not to notice how close his hand had drifted to mine. That night I barely slept. Every time I closed my eyes, I could still feel the warmth of him beside me, the brush of his arm, the sound of his breathing. And for the first time in years, I realized I didn't want to stop noticing. Tomorrow would bring its own kind of reckoning. I could feel it in the way the rain finally eased, leaving the world washed clean and waiting. By the time night rolled around, the rain hadn't let up. The rodeo grounds had turned into a slick mess of mud and puddles, the kind that swallowed your boots whole if you weren't careful. Everyone else had packed up hours ago, but Luke and I stayed, partly because my tent had collapsed in the storm, partly because neither of us seemed ready to call it a night. We were parked at the edge of the field, his old Chevy tucked under the shelter of an oak tree that wasn't doing much to keep the rain off. The storm had mellowed into a steady drizzle, tapping soft against the roof of the truck. Inside, the air was thick with the smell of wet leather, coffee, and something else, something that felt dangerously close to comfort. Luke sat behind the wheel, fiddling with the radio, though every station was just static and half-broken country songs. I was stretched across the passenger seat, damp clothes clinging to my skin, my jacket draped uselessly over my knees. "You look miserable," he said finally, flashing that lopsided grin that always got me in trouble. I rolled my eyes. "You saying that helps?" He chuckled low in his throat. "You want me to say you look great then?" My pulse skipped. The teasing tone was there, sure, but underneath it, something else. Something I wasn't ready to touch. "I'll pass," I muttered, staring out the fogged window. Pretty sure I'm one bad decision away from hypothermia. Well, he said, voice softening, good thing I'm here to save you again. He leaned across me to reach the glove compartment, his arm brushing against my chest. Just skin against fabric, barely a touch, but it was enough to send heat straight through me. I caught the scent of rain and cedar on his shirt and had to fight the urge to close my eyes and breathe it in. When he pulled back, he was holding an old flannel, worn, faded, and impossibly soft. Here. You'll catch a cold. I hesitated. I'm fine, really. Take it, he insisted. You'll make me feel better. That last part did me in. I took it, pulling it over my head, the sleeves too long, the fabric still warm from him. The scent was all Luke, wood smoke, leather, something faintly sweet. I looked down at myself, then back up at him. He was watching me with a faint smile, one hand drumming lightly on the steering wheel. What? I asked. Nothing, he said quickly, looking away. Just, suits you, that's all. Silence settled between us again, heavy and humming. I turned toward the window, pretending to be absorbed by the rain, but my heart was pounding so hard it felt like the whole truck could hear it. We talked for a while after that, about small things, meaningless things. About the rodeo next weekend, the new horses, how the town's diner changed its pie recipe and ruined everything. It was easy, familiar. But under the laughter, there was this undercurrent I couldn't ignore anymore. Every time our eyes met, it lingered too long. Every brush of his hand felt deliberate, even when I knew it wasn't. At one point, he reached over to adjust the heater vent, and his fingers grazed my wrist. Just a second, barely enough to count, but my breath hitched all the same. He noticed. Of course he noticed. You cold? He asked, voice low. Yeah, I lied. A little. Without saying anything else, he dug around behind the seat, pulling out another blanket. He scooted closer, throwing half of it over my lap before draping the rest around himself. Easier to share? He said with a grin that didn't quite reach his eyes. I froze. The bench seat suddenly felt impossibly small. The warmth of his body seeped through the blanket, and when his shoulder brushed mine, it wasn't just warmth, it was lightning. My throat went dry. Luke? He turned his head, eyebrows raised, and I lost my nerve. Never mind. He watched me for a second longer than he should have, his gaze flicking to my mouth before he looked away. Okay, he murmured, almost to himself. The rain thickened again, drumming against the truck's roof like a heartbeat. Luke leaned back, tilting his hat down over his eyes. I thought he might be asleep until he spoke. You ever think about leaving? Leaving? I echoed. Like, this town? He nodded. Yeah. Just picking up, heading somewhere else. Somewhere no one knows you. I stared at the windshield, the streaks of water twisting the world outside into blurred silver lines. All the time, I admitted. But then I think about the people here. About you. He lifted his hat, eyes meeting mine in the dim glow of the dashboard lights. Me? Yeah, I said, my voice softer than I meant. I don't think I could leave you behind. The words hung between us, fragile and dangerous. He looked like he wanted to say something big, but instead he just smiled. A small, sad kind of smile. Guess that's one way to make a guy feel special, he said, but his voice cracked slightly at the end. The power went out at the rodeo grounds not long after. 1 second we had the faint glow of the parking lot lights. The next we were swallowed by darkness. The storm was heavier now, wind rattling the windows, rain hitting like pebbles. Great, I muttered. Now what? Luke shrugged. Now we waited out. A flash of lightning lit up the cab for a second, his face sharp in the sudden brightness, eyes tired but kind, mouth set in that soft, unreadable line. The thunder rolled right after, loud enough to make me flinch. He noticed that too. You okay? Yeah. Just, didn't expect it to be that close. Without a word, he reached out, resting his hand over mine. His palm was rough and warm, thumb brushing once against my knuckles before he pulled back like he hadn't meant to. Except he had. I could tell. Something inside me cracked open then, a mix of want and fear that felt like standing on the edge of a cliff. I wanted to lean in to close that tiny gap between us, but I couldn't. Because if I did, if I crossed that line, nothing would ever be the same. But God, I wanted to. The storm raged on for hours. We passed the time talking, laughing, sharing stories from when we were kids. Somewhere between the thunder and the silence, we stopped pretending not to touch. His hand brushed mine again, slower this time, deliberate. My breath caught, but I didn't pull away. When he shifted closer, the blanket fell across both of us, his arm brushing against my side. The air felt too thick, the space between us too small to keep ignoring. I could feel the heat from his skin even through the fabric. Sam, he said finally, voice rough around the edges. I turned toward him. Yeah. His eyes flicked down just for a heartbeat to my lips. Then back up. You're shivering. I swallowed hard. I'm fine. You're not. He shifted closer, wrapping his arm around my shoulders, pulling me against his chest. Better? It should have felt awkward. It didn't. It felt like something I'd been missing without realizing it. I could hear his heartbeat, steady and sure, feel the rise and fall of his chest under my cheek. My fingers curled in the fabric of his flannel without thinking. Yeah, I murmured. Better. He didn't say anything after that. Neither did I. The world outside was chaos, but inside that truck, everything narrowed to the rhythm of rain, breath, and heartbeat. I should have pulled away. I didn't. Because for the first time in a long time, I wasn't running from what I felt, I was drowning in it. And maybe, just maybe, Luke was too. By the time the storm finally broke, the first light of dawn was seeping through the clouds. We were still tangled under the same blanket, his arms still draped over me. Neither of us moved. If he noticed how tightly I was holding on to him, he didn't say a word. But I felt his thumb trace one slow, absent-minded circle against my shoulder. It was small. Barely anything. But it was enough to tell me that whatever line we'd been walking all these years, we'd just crossed it. The rain had stopped, but the world outside still glistened with its aftermath. Mud puddles catching dawn's light, mist curling over the field, the air thick with that sharp, earthy smell that comes after a storm. Inside the truck, everything felt suspended in that in-between, quiet, heavy waiting. Luke hadn't moved his arm from around me. We were still sitting close, wrapped in the same blanket, the cab filled with the faint rhythm of his breathing. It should have felt awkward by now. It didn't. It just felt fragile. Like any sudden movement would shatter something we'd both been too scared to name. He shifted slightly, his thumb brushing the edge of my collarbone before he cleared his throat. Sun's up. Yeah, I murmured. Guess we made it through. He smiled faintly, eyes still on the windshield. Storms like that always pass, eventually. The words lingered in the air, heavier than he probably meant them to. I watched the light creep across his face, catching in the gold of his stubble, the tired lines around his eyes. God, I wanted to memorize him like that, unguarded, half-awake, real. But my chest felt tight. Too tight. Because sitting there next to him, I realized how much I'd been pretending. Pretending that every look, every small touch didn't mean anything. Pretending that this friendship was enough. It wasn't. Not anymore. I swallowed hard, my pulse hammering against my throat. Luke, I said quietly. He glanced over, brow furrowing. Yeah. I hesitated. My fingers twisted in the edge of the blanket, buying time I didn't have. Do you ever feel like you're standing right at the edge of something but you're too scared to step off? He studied me for a second, that slow, thoughtful way he had when he wasn't sure if I was joking. Depends what's on the other side, he said softly. That's the thing, I said. You don't know. You just hope it's worth it. He smiled faintly. You always did overthink things. Maybe, I said looking down. But this isn't something I can just think away. Sam, he said gently. What are you trying to say? And there it was. The question I'd been avoiding for years. My chest ached with it, every word caught somewhere between fear and truth. I'm saying, I took a breath that didn't quite reach my lungs. I don't know how to keep pretending I don't feel something for you. The silence that followed was deafening. I couldn't look at him. My fingers clenched around the flannel, the air suddenly too warm, too close. I wanted to take it back, to laugh it off, to blame the exhaustion or the storm or anything but the truth. But I couldn't. Because the second I said it, I felt something shift, like the air had been waiting for me to finally let it out. Luke didn't move. Didn't speak. I could hear the soft creak of the leather seat when he turned slightly toward me. Say that again, he said quietly. My voice cracked. I said damn it Luke, I like you, okay? More than I should. More than just a friend's supposed to. And I've tried to ignore it, I really have, but last night, being here with you, it's just... I forced myself to look at him then, and the expression on his face nearly undid me. He looked stunned but not angry. Not disgusted. Just raw. Like he'd been waiting for those words as long as I had. Sam, he said, my name barely a breath. You don't get to just say something like that and expect me to breathe normal again. I blinked, caught between hope and panic. Then what do I do? He huffed out a laugh, quiet and shaky. Hell if I know. We sat there in the mess of it, hearts thudding, breaths uneven. I wanted him to say something, anything. To tell me I hadn't just ruined everything. Finally he leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees, hands clasped. His hat was still tipped low, hiding his eyes. You remember last summer? The night after the county fair. Yeah, I said slowly. We were out by the river. You tried to teach me to skip stones. He nodded. You couldn't get one to skip. You got mad, said you'd never figure it out. I told you to keep trying, that you'd get it eventually. I smiled faintly. You also said my throwing arm was tragic. He chuckled, then his voice went soft again. What I didn't tell you is, I wasn't watching the river. I was watching you. The words hit like a punch to the chest. He finally looked up, meeting my eyes. I've been trying not to think about it ever since. Trying to tell myself it was nothing. That I was just tired. That it didn't mean what I thought it did. But it did, Sam. It did. I stared at him, barely breathing. You're saying? I'm saying I've been an idiot, he cut in. Because I knew. Deep down I knew how I felt. I just didn't want to screw this up. Didn't want to lose you over something I couldn't take back. The confession hung between us, delicate and heavy all at once. My throat felt dry. Then why now? He hesitated. Because you said it first. That broke something in me, some mix of relief and ache and years of quiet pretending. I laughed, but it came out shaky. You're the worst, you know that? Yeah, he said softly. But you still like me anyway. He reached out then, slow enough that I could have pulled away. But I didn't. His fingers brushed mine, tentative, trembling. I felt the roughness of his calluses, the warmth that had always felt safe but now burned in the best way. Sam, he whispered, if we do this, there's no going back. I don't want to go back. Something flickered in his eyes, fear, hope, hunger. All of it. He moved closer, his hand coming up to cup the side of my face. His thumb traced along my jaw, slow and careful, like he was memorizing the moment. Tell me to stop, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. I shook my head. Don't. The space between us disappeared. His lips met mine, gentle at first, then deeper, like years of silence had built to this one impossible second. It wasn't polished or perfect. It was rain and breath and everything we hadn't said. When he pulled back, his forehead rested against mine, both of us breathing hard. I've wanted to do that for longer than I'll ever admit, he murmured. Then don't admit it, I whispered back. Just do it again. He laughed, quiet and disbelieving, before kissing me again, slower this time, steadier. The kind of kiss that wasn't about fire but about finding home. When we finally pulled apart, the world outside had shifted from gray to gold. The sun broke through the clouds, lighting up the wet earth and turning the puddles into mirrors. Luke leaned back, looking at me like I was something he hadn't known he'd been searching for. So what now? He asked softly. I smiled, still breathless. Now, we see where it goes. He reached out, fingers tracing over mine again, this time without hesitation. I can live with that. The storm had passed. But inside that truck, I knew another kind of storm had just begun. The kind that changes everything, that strips you bare, that leaves you standing in the sunlight, not afraid anymore. And for the first time in my life, I wasn't running from it. I was running toward it. The sun had fully broken through the clouds by the time we finally came up for air, literally and metaphorically. The cab of the truck was drenched in light, golden and warm, catching every speck of dust like glitter in the air. The storm outside was gone, but the one inside me was just beginning to settle. Somewhere between disbelief, relief, and a quiet, aching joy I hadn't dared imagine could be real. Luke sat beside me, one arm draped casually along the back of the seat, his other hand resting loosely over mine. We hadn't said much after the kiss, just sat there, breathing, like both of us were afraid to break the fragile magic hanging between us. His thumb brushed small circles across my knuckles, a quiet rhythm that felt more intimate than anything we'd ever shared before. You're quiet, he said finally, turning his head toward me. I laughed under my breath. I'm trying not to freak out, actually. He grinned. That bad, huh? Bad. I shook my head, leaning back against the seat. No. Just a lot. Yeah, he said, his smile softening. It's a lot. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The sound of the birds outside filled the silence, the world slowly waking up around us. Everything felt new, like the storm had washed it clean. Can I ask you something? I said quietly. He nodded. When did you know? He tilted his head, considering. That I liked you? Yeah. He chuckled, rubbing the back of his neck. Probably the night we fixed your saddle together. What was that, 2 years ago? You were cussing under your breath, trying to keep the strap from slipping. I remember thinking I'd never seen someone look so determined and so damn beautiful at the same time. I blinked. Beautiful? You thought that? Still do, he said easily, eyes glinting. What, you think you're the only one who gets to do all the staring? I felt my cheeks heat. I wasn't staring. Oh, you were, he teased, leaning a little closer. You just thought you were being subtle. I laughed despite myself, shoving his shoulder. You're impossible. Yeah, he said, catching my wrist gently before I could pull back. But you still like me anyway. The way he said it, playful but tender, made my chest tighten. I let him keep my hand, our fingers tangling without either of us saying anything more. The air between us had changed. It wasn't just charged, it was lighter somehow, freer. Every small touch, every shared glance now carried something honest, unhidden. Luke turned in his seat, facing me fully. So, he said. What now? What do you mean? He shrugged. I mean, I've spent the last few years pretending I didn't want to kiss you. You've apparently been doing the same thing. Now we're sitting here, soaked, hungry, and still in yesterday's clothes. Doesn't exactly scream romantic beginning, does it? I laughed softly. It's honest, though. Yeah, he said, smiling. I'll take honest. He looked down at our joined hands, thumb brushing the back of mine again. You really meant what you said last night, didn't you? About not wanting to go back. Every word, I said. Good, he said simply. Because I don't either. We ended up climbing out of the truck a little later, stretching our legs. The air was cool and damp, the ground still slick from the rain. Steam rose from the earth where sunlight met the wet dirt. Luke grabbed the coffee thermos from the cab and took a long drink before passing it to me. Still warm, he said. Guess the storm didn't ruin everything. I took it, sipping carefully. Could use more sugar. Always could, he said with a grin. I handed it back. So what happens when people find out? He looked out over the field, quiet for a long time. You worried about that? I shrugged. A little. This town isn't exactly known for minding its own business. He nodded slowly. You're right. Folks talk. He turned toward me, his expression serious now. But I've been hiding parts of myself for years, Sam. I'm tired of it. I don't care if they talk. As long as you're beside me. Something in my chest gave way at that, like a tension I hadn't realized I'd been carrying. I stepped closer, close enough to see the faint stubble along his jaw, the scar near his temple from when we were kids. You really mean that? He nodded. I've spent too long pretending to be what everyone expects. I'm done with that. And if it means taking a little heat from the neighbors, then so be it. A small smile tugged at my lips. You sure about this? He tilted his head, smiling back. Are you? Instead of answering, I reached up, brushing a raindrop, or maybe a tear, from his cheek. He caught my wrist, pressing my hand gently against his jaw. I'm sure, I said. He leaned down, kissing my palm, the gesture slow and reverent. Then yeah, I'm sure too. We packed up a few hours later. The rodeo grounds were quiet, nothing but the sound of the wind moving through the trees. Luke's hand brushed mine every so often as we loaded the gear, both of us pretending not to notice just how natural it felt. At one point, as he was tossing a saddle into the truck bed, he looked over his shoulder and smirked. You know, if we keep smiling like this, everyone's gonna think we won the damn rodeo. I laughed, throwing a towel at him. We kinda did, didn't we? Yeah, he said, catching it midair. Guess we did. When everything was packed, he turned to me, his expression thoughtful. You know, he said, there's a rodeo up north next month. Big one. I was planning to go alone, but... He trailed off. But... I prompted. But maybe I'd rather have you there. I smiled. You asking me to come with you? He shrugged, eyes glinting. Depends. You planning to keep making me breakfast in the mornings, or was that just a one-time thing? I laughed. I made you breakfast once, and you complained about the eggs. Only because they were burnt. They weren't burnt. They were charred, Sam. You're impossible. He grinned, stepping closer until his boots nearly touched mine. Yeah, but you still like me anyway. I shook my head, smiling despite myself. You really like saying that, don't you? He nodded. Mostly 'cause it's true. As the sun climbed higher, we leaned against the truck, shoulder to shoulder. His hand found mine again, fingers interlocking easily. We didn't talk much after that. Didn't need to. The quiet between us wasn't the same as before. It was softer, warmer, filled with all the words we didn't have to say anymore. I watched the clouds drift across the sky, feeling something I hadn't in a long time, peace. You know, Luke said after a while, his voice low and thoughtful, I don't know where this is gonna go. But I want to find out. I turned to him. Yeah, I said. Me too. He looked at me for a long moment, eyes steady and unguarded. Then he smiled that familiar, lopsided smile. Guess we're both a little crazy. Maybe, I said, leaning into his shoulder. But I've been crazy about you for a while, so I'm used to it. He laughed quietly, pressing a kiss to the side of my head. Good. 'Cause I don't plan on going anywhere. We stayed there until the day started to heat up, talking about everything and nothing. About the rodeo, the horses, what it would be like to just take off for a while, to see something beyond this town. There were things to figure out, sure, people, families, expectations, but for now none of that mattered. For now it was just us. Two cowboys sitting in the aftermath of a storm, finally brave enough to stop running from what they felt. When we finally climbed into the truck again, he reached for my hand on the gearshift. I let him take it, our fingers fitting together like they'd always been meant to. As the engine rumbled to life, he looked over at me and smiled. You ready? I grinned back. Always. And as the truck rolled down the dirt road, sun spilling through the windshield and dust rising behind us, I realized that for the first time in a long, long while, I wasn't driving away from something. I was driving towards someone. The road stretched before us in golden ripples of light, the world still damp and shining from the night before. Luke's old Chevy rattled over every bump, the hum of the engine mingling with the low twang of a song playing through the radio. One of those old country tunes about starting over, about love that feels like coming home. It was fitting, I guessed. Because for once in my life, that's exactly what it felt like. Neither of us spoke for a long time. We didn't have to. The silence wasn't the kind we used to share, the heavy kind, full of unsaid things. This one felt open, like the world had made more room for us. His hand rested on the console between us, his thumb tracing lazy circles against my skin, a small, steady reminder that this was real. I caught myself smiling at nothing, my chest light in a way that felt almost unfamiliar. Luke noticed. You look like a man with a secret, he said, glancing at me from under the brim of his hat. I smirked. Maybe I am. Mind sharing it with the class? I shrugged, turning to the window. Just thinking how weird it feels not hiding anymore. He hummed in quiet agreement. Yeah. Feels good though, doesn't it? Better than I thought it would. Luke grinned. That's 'cause I'm irresistible. I laughed, shaking my head. You really don't have a humble bone in your body, do you? Nope, he said easily, eyes crinkling. You're stuck with me and my big ego now. Stuck, huh? He glanced sideways at me, grin softening. Yeah. Unless you plan on running again. The teasing tone was still there, but underneath it, something vulnerable. He meant it. All of it. I turned toward him fully, taking in the way the morning light brushed against his face, the way his fingers tightened around mine just slightly, like he was afraid I'd disappear if he didn't hold on. Not running, I said quietly. Not this time. He smiled, eyes flicking back to the road. Good. We made a stop at a small diner on the edge of town, one of those places with chipped mugs, squeaky booths, and a jukebox that only played songs from before we were born. The old waitress behind the counter gave us both a knowing smile as we slid into a booth near the window. Luke ordered pancakes. I ordered coffee. It wasn't exactly romantic, but it was easy. The kind of morning I didn't know I'd been missing until I had it. So, Luke said, pouring syrup over his stack. You ever think about where we go from here? I stirred my coffee slowly, watching the steam rise. You mean us? He nodded. Yeah, I said after a moment. I've been thinking about it. And? I hesitated, my heart doing that nervous flutter again. I think I just want to take it one day at a time. No pressure. No pretending. Just us. He smiled at that, his eyes warm and steady. That sounds about right. Yeah. Yeah. You and me figuring it out as we go. I like the sound of that. He reached across the table then, sliding his hand over mine. The diner was quiet enough that I could hear the scrape of ceramic against wood, the faint clatter of plates in the kitchen. And maybe the world still had its opinions and expectations, but right then I didn't care. All I cared about was the way his hand fit against mine and the calm that came with it. You ever think we'd end up here? I asked. He chuckled. Not in a million years. But I'm glad we did. I smiled, looking down at our hands. Me too. After breakfast, we drove out to the edge of town, the old trail that wound up toward the hills overlooking the valley. We used to come here as kids, back when everything felt simpler. It felt right to come back now, to the place where it had all started. The rain had left the dirt soft under our boots, the grass still glittering with dew. We climbed the hill in easy silence, the air cool and fresh against our skin. At the top, we stopped, taking in the view, miles of open land, fences stretching like ribs across the horizon, and the faint sound of cattle lowing in the distance. The world felt big and small all at once. Luke tipped his hat back, squinting at the sun. You know, I used to come up here when I needed to think. Yeah. I asked. About what? He smiled faintly. Mostly you. I laughed softly. You're full of it. I'm serious, he said, turning toward me. You'd be out there practicing or working late, and I'd be up here thinking how much easier it'd be if I could just tell you what I was feeling. But I never did. I kept telling myself it was better that way. Safer. And now? He took a deep breath, the wind catching the edge of his hat. Now I don't want safe. I just want you. There it was, simple, quiet, and completely true. I stepped closer, close enough to feel his warmth through the space between us. You've got me, I said softly. For as long as you want me. He smiled, really smiled this time, and reached out, tucking a strand of hair behind my ear before his hand lingered against my neck. That sounds like forever to me. I leaned into his touch, my heart settling in a way it hadn't in years. Forever's a long time, cowboy. He grinned. Good thing I'm stubborn. We stayed there for a while, sitting in the grass, watching the sunlight climb higher over the valley. The world below moved on, trucks rumbling down distant roads, horses grazing in the fields, but up here time felt different. Slower. Kinder. Luke stretched out beside me, hat over his eyes, one arm draped across his stomach. I lay back too, close enough that our shoulders touched. The breeze carried the smell of wet earth and wildflowers, and somewhere in the distance, a hawk cried. You ever think about the future? I asked after a while. He tipped his hat up just enough to look at me. Sometimes. Why? I don't know. Just wondering what it looks like now. He smiled, thoughtful. Honestly? I don't need to have it all figured out. I just want to wake up and see you there. Maybe fix up the ranch, maybe travel a little. Doesn't matter as long as you're part of it. The simplicity of it hit me harder than I expected. It wasn't about grand gestures or promises we couldn't keep. It was just about showing up, every day together. Sounds perfect, I said. It will be, he said softly. We'll make it that way. By the time we drove back down, the sun was high and the world felt alive again, like the storm had been nothing but a test, something we'd had to weather to get here. When we reached the fork in the road, Luke slowed the truck and turned to me. You still got plans to fix that leaky tent of yours? I grinned, thinking I might retire it. He smirked. Good. I was hoping you'd say that. I've got a spare room at the ranch, you know? Spare room, huh? I teased. He shrugged innocently. Just saying. It's got a great view. Decent company, too. I laughed. Guess I could use a change of scenery. He smiled, reaching over to squeeze my hand. Welcome home, then. As the truck rolled back toward town, the sky stretched wide and endless above us, streaked with white clouds and sunlight. My heart felt full, brimmed with things I didn't need to say because somehow he already knew. The storm had brought us here, broken and bare and honest. And now, as the world opened before us, I realized that this wasn't the end of the story. It was the beginning, the first step of something that felt both terrifying and beautiful in its simplicity. I turned to Luke, unable to hide the smile that crept across my face. Hey, I said. He glanced over. Yeah. You still owe me a rematch in roping practice. He laughed, shaking his head. You never quit, do you? Not when I've got something worth chasing. He grinned, squeezing my hand tighter. Then you better hold on, partner. I'm not going anywhere. And as the sun climbed higher, painting the sky in gold and fire, I believed him. Because for the first time in my life, forever didn't feel like a promise. It felt like a road we were already riding down side by side.